that the share today is in memory of Frank Borg, who was a very close friend, besides being a loyal member of my shul. And I always mention, there are people that after they pass away, initially you miss them, but after a while, you adjust to the situation. And there are people who, after a while, you remember them. And there are people that even after a while, you continue to miss them. And Frank was in that third category, that it's not only that we remember him, we always remember him, but he's a person who his absence is felt every time we walk into the shul. And it was not just on a shul level. I could add that this is on a personal level as well. Okay, I want to discuss the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer in conjunction with the situation that we're facing in Eretz Yisrael today. Now, there is a dispute, a well-known dispute between the Rambam. I've discussed it many, many times. I'm not going to discuss it today from a halachic perspective, but there is a dispute between the Rambam and Tosfos, and for that matter, between the Rambam and most of the Mefarshim, most of the commentaries, whether the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer, the mitzvah of counting the Omer today, is a mitzvah d'oraisa, is a biblical mitzvah, or is it a rabbinic mitzvah? Now, when the Beis Hamikdash was in existence, and the Korban Omer, the Omer sacrifice was given, everybody agrees that the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer, the mitzvah of counting the days between Pesach and Shavuos, was a biblical mitzvah. There is, however, a dispute whether when the Beis Hamikdash is not in existence, when the Korban Omer, the Omer sacrifice is not given, whether the mitzvah of counting the Omer is to be considered a biblical mitzvah, or is it only a rabbinic mitzvah, Zeichel Mikdash, in order to remember the Beis Hamikdash. Now, most of the Mefarshim, many reasons, are given as the lesson to be derived from the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer. But the reason given most is the fact that it's a re-experience of the Jewish people after having left Egypt, after the Exodus, being told by Moshe Rabbeinu that the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that they're going to travel to Mount Sinai, and where HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where God is going to appear to them. And they're going to receive the Torah. And they asked Moshe Rabbeinu, when is this going to happen? And Moshe Rabbeinu said, after 50 days, or at 50 days. So they began counting the 50 days. And the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer is, in a sense, for us to re-undergo that experience, to re-experience the anticipation of the Jewish people of looking forward to having this meeting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to have this revelation, and to receive the Torah. And we have to understand, especially when the Beis HaMikdash is in existence, and it is the unanimous opinion of all the commentaries that under those circumstances, the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer is a biblical mitzvah, is a required mitzvah. Why was it necessary to have a mitzvah of Sefiras Omer, of to re-experience? After all, I've mentioned many times the Ramban's opinion. The Ramban's opinion is that in a sense, the purpose of the Beis HaMikdash is the perpetuation and the continuation of Matan Torah. So in a sense, Matan Torah was constantly there. So why was it important to re-undergo that experience of anticipation, of looking forward to Matan Torah, when Matan Torah was continuously taking place for the Jewish people? Now, however, very often, we only value something before we get it. We only value something before we have it, when we do not yet have it. But once we have something, we take it for granted. And in a sense, the emotions and the feelings that we had of valuing that which we have now plays less of a role for us. Because it was there yesterday, it's there today, and we are sure that it will be there tomorrow. But before we have it, we have the strong longing for it, wanting to get it. And also, but the reverse is true also. Sometimes when we lose something that we valued originally, we get used to not having something, especially with the passage of times. And to a certain degree, when we count Sefiras Omer, when they counted Sefiras Omer in the time when the Beis Hamikdash was in existence. It was to negate that feeling of taking something for granted, of not being excited about Kabbalah Torah, because it's always there. And it's for this reason that it's not just enough to remember. It's not simple remembering, but it has to be re-experiencing. Simple remembering is something of the past. But unless we have those emotions and those feelings that we had at the very beginning, even before we received it, when we did not yet have it, why did the Jewish people count the days? Because it was something that they didn't have. They weren't able to take it for granted. So when we re-experience it, we inculcate those feelings into our emotions. And even when the Beis Hamikdash is in existence and Matan Torah is being perpetuated, it becomes necessary. It becomes necessary for us to have those same feelings, not to let those feelings that we had at the very beginning to wane. And in a sense, when we look at our feelings regarding Eretz Yisrael, we find a similar attitude. What led to the Churban? What did HaKadosh Baruch Hu warn the Jewish people in Parshas V'eschanan? V'noshantem ba'aretz. You'll have children and children's children. You'll have the land of Eretz Yisrael for generations. And because you'll have it for generations, the land will become antiquated, or you become antiquated in the land. That brought about the Churban, being there for generations. Because we begin to take it for granted. It was there yesterday. My parents had it. My grandparents had it. I'll have it. And my children will have it. We take it for granted. We take it for granted religiously. And we take it for granted militarily and diplomatically. We're not on constant guard on all levels. And the same thing is true, unfortunately, in the reverse. Golus presents a challenge to us also, because we begin to think that because we survive one or two generations or three generations in Golus, we will survive the other generations as well. What was the problem with the Jewish people in Europe? Why didn't they try? There were those that did, then there were situations where nations of the world tried to limit the number of Jews going to Eretz Yisrael. But there were times also when there was opportunities for the Jewish people to go to Eretz Yisrael. And the Jewish people did not go to Eretz Yisrael. There was an attitude that we've been in Europe. We established communities. And yes, there were pogroms. Yes, there was anti-Semitism. But we survived it. And perhaps we did not place enough emphasis on the need for a special Jewish homeland in our own time or in their own time. And even when the threat of the Holocaust hung over the Jewish people, action was not taken because we were used to the Golus of Europe. Even to go to another place within the exile, attempts were not made till it was too late. And why was this? Because we survived till now, and we will survive later. We became used to Golus. I've mentioned and even though after Yom HaKippurim and after the Seder, we screamed out, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. And even though in the davening we mentioned constantly, especially in Tfilas Musaf, how we were looking forward to the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, to doing the Avodah. But somehow, that's where it ended. I mentioned the Baal HaTurim. The Baal HaTurim says in Parshas Lech Lecha that the word Lech Lecha is mentioned twice in the Torah. One time it's mentioned Lech Lecha mi'artzecha mi'moladecha mi'beis avicha. When the command was given to Avraham Avinu, the command was given to Abraham to leave his homeland, to leave his father's house, and to go El Oretz Asher Areka, to go to the land that I will show you. In other words, to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel. And the second time it's mentioned at the time of the Akedah, Lech Lecha El Eretz HaMoriah. When Avram Avinu, when the patriarch Abraham was told to take his son Yitzchak and to put him on the altar, which was the future site of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Baal Term comments, Lech Lecha, twice, of going to Eretz Yisrael and going to Yerushalayim, going to Har Moriah, which is the future site of the Beis HaMikdash, of the Temple Mount, corresponds with the two times the Jewish people, after entering Eretz Yisrael, will go into Golus and go into exile. So these two psukim, these two verses in the Torah that speak about a command to Abraham to go to Eretz Yisrael and to go to Yerushalayim, in a sense, to set the foundation for the Beis HaMikdash. Because the altar that Yitzchak was placed on was the site of the future altar for generations to come, where the Beis HaMikdash was going to be rebuilt. And then while it's true that that site was used as an altar by Adam HaRishon, by Cain and Hevel, by Noah, but in a sense, as the being, the site to identify it as the home where the Jewish people come to have a relationship with God, to designate it for future generations. That began with Avram taking Yitzchak, with Abraham taking Isaac and placing him on the altar that he built over there. And so these two verses talk about going to Eretz Yisrael and going to Jerusalem, going to the land of Israel, and going to the future site of the Beis HaMikdash. And yet, the Baal Turim says that these two psukim, these two verses, are a remez, are an indication of the two times that Jewish people are going to go to Golus, that the Jewish people are going to exile. What is the idea behind it? But the idea behind it is that there are two perspectives of exile. We could see exile as a trip away from Eretz Yisrael and away from Yerushalayim. And we mentioned that in the Carbon Musaf. Umnei chatenu galinu me'artzenu, v'nisrachatnu me'alat masenu. Because of our sons, we went into exile from our land. But Eretz Yisrael is all, the Golus is also a trip towards Eretz Yisrael. And there are rituals that emphasizes one approach, specifically on Tisha B'Av. We emphasize the feelings of not having something. We cry because of what we lost. But there are times that we have to look forward to the future. It's not enough to cry for the loss, but the crying for the loss is important because of the role it plays for us in looking forward to the future. And the same thing, this is meeting that challenge of accepting Golus, of accepting the situation as it is, and not to look at things from the perspective of the future. And I think we see the Medrash, I've mentioned this Medrash, the Das Genim in Balatosva says that Avraham Avinu, when he took Yitzchak to Har Moriah, to the land of Moriah, the future site of the Beis Hamikdash, to Jerusalem, the future Jerusalem. But he took Shnei Aravito. He took 2 servants with him. And who were the servants? The Medrash says it was Yishmael and Eliezer. Yishmael was the son of Hagar, a shifcha, a maidservant. Yishmael had the perspective of a servant, of a slave. Eliezer, as great as Eliezer was, and Eliezer was certainly a great person, but Eliezer also was, even though he was Moshe, he was in charge of Avram's house, but nevertheless, after all said and done, he was a servant, and he had the perspective of the servant. And the Medrash says, "Vayihi bayom hashlishi," it was when Abraham was going with the donkey, with Yitzchak, with Yishmael and Eliezer, the Shnei Arab, the 2 servants. Vayaras hamakam merachok. He saw the place from afar. He saw Har Moriah. He saw the future site of the Beis Hamikdash. He saw Jerusalem from afar. And the Medrash says he turned. What did he see? The Medrash says. The Medrash says he saw a Har Noah. He saw a beautiful mountain. For anon kosher aleha, there was a heavenly cloud attached to it. And he turned to Eliezer, he turned to Yitzchak, and he said to Yitzchak, "Yitzchak, what do you see?" And Yitzchak said, "I see Har Noah. I see a beautiful mountain. V'nanan kosher aleha, and there's a heavenly cloud attached to it." He then turned to the Shnei Arab, to his 2 servants, to Yishmael and to Eliezer. And he said to them, "What do you see?" And they said, "We don't see anything special. Apparently, for them, Har Sinai wasn't anything special. Har Moriah didn't look any different than any other mountain. And they certainly didn't see an unkosher Elaha. And the question is, okay, Yishmael, even though he did tshuva and everything, but Eliezer was so great, at least at that time, you see, when he had to get the next Sedra, a wife for Yitzchak, he had Kfitzas Haderech. Miraculous events took place. Chazal tell us, Yofes Yichosan Shalab De Avos Yosem Tarasan Shalbonim. Every word that he said was important to learn from. And nevertheless, he wasn't able to see anything special about Har Moriah. It was like any other mountain in the area. And he certainly wasn't able to see Danan Kasher Aleha, the heavenly mountain. So Avram said, Shvu lechem poem achamor. You stay here with the donkey. The donkey doesn't see anything special either. And the Medrash tells us that the donkey is symbolic of the fact. Gemara in Dushas has a little different. The Dasken Baltos, explaining the Medrash says that the donkey represents the idea of not having future generations. It represents the lack of a future, of a connection to the future. And the Dasken Baltosvis associates with the idea that an Evet halachically is not considered to have pedigree. There is no linkage between him and his former generations and him and his future generations. A slave only has the perspective of a present, the fleeting moment of the present. What's the idea? At that time, there was no heavenly cloud, perhaps, hanging over Har Moriah. The Beis HaMikdash was not built. But that was the difference between Abraham and Yitzchak on one hand, and Yishmael and Eliezer on the other hand. As great as Eliezer was, Eliezer only saw what was in front of him. And that's a servile perspective. Many ask, I've repeated this, Rasa Shivcha Layam, the maidservant at the sea, saw more than Yecheskel ben Buzi, saw more revelation of godliness than Yecheskel ben Buzi, than the prophet Yecheskel. But what happened with what the maidservant at the sea saw? The maidservant had a servile perspective. At that moment, she saw more. But it stopped at that moment. Yecheskel ben Buzi was able to draw inspiration and to take the inspiration with him into the future. And even more than that, he was able to take inspiration from the future and bring it into the present. The glasses, if I could use that example, that Yechezkel ben Buzi put over his eyes, integrated past, present, and future. When the Jewish people are identified sometimes as an Am Sheyoref, my father would say, someone who has a stiff neck can only look in one direction from the spot he's standing on. He's not able to integrate from all sides, only what's straight ahead of him. When the Jewish people are an Am Sheyoref, they only see what's right in front of them. The past is gone and the future is not here, and both play no role in their perspective. But when you wear the glasses of integrated vision, when the future plays a role in your thinking, and when you see the events of the day and you react to the events of the day, not just what's in front of you, but based on the integrating the past, present, and future together, and especially a future, you have an altogether different perspective. And that's the idea. They saw an unankosha Har Noah. Har Maria was a beautiful mountain, not because of its present status, but because of its future status. There was an unankosha Alaha because it was the site, the future site of the Beis HaMikdash. They had integrated vision. Perhaps that's the problem that we're facing today. Because when we approached Eretz Yisrael, even those who are dedicated to Eretz Yisrael, and we have to evaluate issues that have to do with Eretz Yisrael, we don't view it from the perspective of integrated vision. We view it from the perspective of today. What's best from the perspective of today? We get scared of Dumos Holam because of the perspective of today. We don't understand when we give in little by little. Perhaps from the interest of today, that's better. But in terms of the long-term interest, it would be different. And I think this is the idea of seeing in Golus, seeing Eretz Yisrael, seeing Golus not just a trip away from Yerushalayim. And I think this was the problem. And I'm not finding fault. Chas v'shalom with the Jews in Europe, they were much greater than us. But at the same time, there was much that we saw that they didn't see. And they began to think, we survived yesterday, We survive today, we'll survive tomorrow. So, Vayaras Hamakom Erachok. Eliezer could see Gilu Shechina when it was right in front of him. And when it had to evaluate a problem, he evaluated on the basis of the way things were right in front of him. And Yishmael certainly was that way. But we were meant to be a perpetual people. Esav, I mentioned all the time. Esav Nasati as Harseyer. L'reshes also. Esav starts his nation right away. Why? Esav doesn't know how to deal with hardship. The Jewish people did not start their nation right away. In order that they should be able to deal in future circumstances, they should be able to deal with an exile. They should be able to overcome difficult circumstances. Because the Jewish people were meant to be a perpetual people. But we have to act as a perpetual people. And we made mistakes. We all made mistakes. And I'm not trying to find fault with people who made mistakes that I would have made. But we have to learn a lesson. When we made all these treaties that was constantly giving and not getting real assurances about. We built the foundation for what the General Assembly passed. Okay. Security Council will reject it because of veto. But we built the foundation for that problem. If not for these treaties, there would never have been a foundation to declare that the Palestinian murderers should be considered as a nation that they were never before. Why? Because we didn't see things from the perspective of the future. We only saw it from the perspective of now. And we became, to a certain degree, like the servants. We have a servile perspective. And the servile perspective, from that perspective, but we harmed our future. And worse than that, we harmed the future of our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. I'm not finding fault, but we have to learn the lesson. It's no one's fault. We had no way of understanding this. But it only comes our fault after we don't learn our own lesson. We're not prophets, and we're not expected to be prophets. But we have to think and learn from what we experience. So, and even when we have Eretz Yisrael, we can't take it for granted. Just because we have it today, we have it tomorrow. Of course, we believe that it's given to us permanently, but we have to keep it permanently. It's one thing to get, it's another thing to keep. You know, after the 6-Day War, there was a certain Gadol B'Torah, and I'm not finding fault. It's actually, it's with a certain degree of admiration that I'm saying this. A person who actually had strong feelings for Zion, strong feelings for the Jewish people, keeping the land of Eretz Yisrael. And he said that it's impossible that the Jewish people will give it back. He said the process of Gula, once it begins, cannot be stopped. And in a sense, giving back to areas of Eretz Yisrael is a negation of the process of Gula. And theoretically, he's probably right. Theoretically, he's probably right. But the mistake that he made, and I'm only able to say that because hindsight is 20/20 vision. Believe me, I'm nowhere near as smart as these people were. But I was born later than them, and because of that, I'm able to look back, whereas they, although certainly were motivated by the future perspective, a thing failed to realize HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us, but we have to take, and we have to keep. We have a certain responsibility. But it's not only from the messianic perspective. We can't assume what the situation is today will be the situation tomorrow, especially where they openly say what their intentions are. The world ignores the fact that these Palestinians, as they call themselves, are saying one day after another what their real goals are. They speak about 2 states. And they speak at the same time about annihilating every Jew. What happened when Gaza was given back? What happened? They made no secret of their intentions. The European Union that paid so much money for them to keep factories. all kinds of buildings for industry, for agricultural produce, to produce agricultural produce. They burnt it down. In one day. They didn't want it to look like they were participating in the agreement. They wanted to make it look like they captured it. There was no secret. Almost the same mistake, except we had more severe consequences. The United States with Afghanistan. There was an agreement made. But the agreement, in the last couple days, they didn't want to make it appear that it was part of an agreement. They went and killed American soldiers. They wanted to appear, we captured it from the Americans. And the Americans were stupid enough to not see that. Biden, the world's great genius, he's not going to give arms to Israel. But look at the arms he left with Afghanistan. And of course, and we have to know that when we view things only from the perspective of the present, we're going to lose in the future. When the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer gives us this perspective that we cannot see things only from the perspective of the present. We have to put ourselves actually back in the past and look at the future. It reminds us of the significance of seeing things in the future. And I want to mention years ago, there was a great emphasis among the religious Zionists about Aschalta de Gula. They saw the establishment of the state of Israel as the beginning of the Gula. And in a sense, they were criticized severely from that perspective. And many of the religious Zionists today have withdrawn from that perspective. And to be honest, I personally had trouble understanding why they place so much focus on this idea of Aschalta de Gula. Of course, I believed in the coming of Mashiach. It's one of the Animamins. Animamin be'amuna shlema. The Alpha Pishias Mameya. But I didn't know why there was so much criticism. But when I look at what's taking place today among religious Zionists, there is less and less. I shouldn't say no. Yeah, they'll use the words as chal to the gula, because that became the cry. But we have to understand that if Eretz Yisrael is to be seen as chal to the gula, it has to be vayaris hamakam erachok. It's not enough to see parades. We have to see a hard north because of kosher aleh. We have to see a heavenly cloud. We have to look forward to see the Kohanim doing the avodah. And of course, on a military level, we have to make sure that we are not endangering Klal Yisrael the future. We are not trading tomorrow for today. We have to look at today from the perspective of the future. I'm not only talking now from a messianic perspective, of course I'm mentioning that, but from a militaristic perspective. When we make these peace treaties, we have to make sure that we're not trading we're not trading the future for the present. And our re-experiencing is important, whether we're in Golos or whether we're in Eretz Yisrael. We can't take the fact that we have Eretz Yisrael for granted. We have to be on constant guard. The Peace Now movement, that to a certain degree was the foundation of the trouble we're having today, focused on now. And we have to know that the now is the beginning of the future. The now can't be separated from the future. The Sefiras Omer tells us, on one hand, that we have to value the future. We have to look forward to the future. And we can't take anything for granted. And yes, we came to Eretz Yisrael, but that coming to Eretz Yisrael, establishing a Jewish state, is far from the Gula. My father, when they would ask my father, is Eretz Yisrael the Aschalta, the state of Israel, the Aschalta, the Gula or not? He says it depends upon us. If we will use that, if we'll use the state of Israel to help bring the Gula, then it'll be Eschal to the Gula. But if we're not going to use the state of Israel, then it won't be the Eschal to the Gula. When we think about the state of Israel, we have to see it if we have as a potential. We have to use it. On one hand, we have to use it to build up the Jewish Yishuv, give people the ability to live there, to be on constant guard. Eretz Yisrael was a place Jewish people didn't have a place to go to. But we have to make sure that Israel remains a place where Jews could live in safety. On the other hand, it's a schal to the gula. If the state of Israel will be used and continue to be used increasingly to devote ourselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to devote ourselves to Torah, to the upbuilding of Klal Yisrael, and integrating the past, the present, and the future of the Jewish people and their relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I think that perhaps when we look at the creation of the state of Israel during the time of Sefira, it reminds us of the significance of looking Teretz Yisrael not from just the perspective of one day, but looking to it from the perspective of past, present, and future together.
If people have questions, please put them in the chat. One question is, we know that we have a relationship with Hashem as avadim and also as banim, as children. Does that fit in with the Am Hadom al Chamor that Rabbi mentioned earlier in the share?
Being avadim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is different than being avadim to human beings.
Another question, can you please comment about those who count Sefiras Omer during Bein Hashmashos?
Okay, if Sefiras Omer is the Rabbanan, so according to many poskim, then we could if Sefiras Omer is the Rabbanan, so then you according to many shittos, according to Tosfos anyway, according to Tosfos' opinion, and it seems that the Shulchan Aruch seems to go along with that, that you could be yotzei the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer, because Safek the Rabbanan L'Kula, it's and then there are opinions that, let's say, even if we say Sefiras Omer is the Araisa, but if you count early, the day is counted. So there is some doubt as to whether you will fulfill the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer, but you will have counted the day, so future days you will be able to count as well. The count will have continued.
This question, I'm a draft not sure about it, but if in Galus we behave like Yaakov, that we have to appease Esav, how about nowadays when we have a country, we have to be appeasing Esav or the United States, or not have to act like an Eved?
When we have limits on what we could do, we're limited. But sometimes we are too enthusiastic about being Gavadim. And actually, the Medrash is somewhat critical of Yaakov, that he said, Avdecha Adoni Esav. The Medrash is critical, and so there seems to be a contradiction in the Medrash Rabbah in Vayishlach. And one Medrash says that Yaakov, that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi He referred when he sent a message to Rome. So he said, Avdecha Yehuda. And so the Medrash says, he said, am I worse than my ancestor Yaakov? And the other Medrash says that Yaakov was penalized, that there were 7 kings among Esav, because 7 times he referred to himself as an Eved and Esav as a master. So and he was penalized that there were 7 generations kings in Esav before there was a king in Yisrael. So there seems to be a contradiction in approach, and the simple answer is, where it's necessary, it's necessary. But Yaakov did it when it wasn't necessary. As the Medrash says, who told Yaakov to send the messenger to Esav? Had he where Esav was didn't have anything to do with him. And if Yaakov had not sent a messenger, there wouldn't have been a problem. It was only necessary because he sent the messenger. And that's the same answer here. Where it's necessary, it's necessary. Where it's not necessary, it's not necessary. But the problem sometimes is that we do not, because of our past experiences, because of past situations, we begin to think that our present situation is exactly like that. There were times when the cardinals of the church ruled over the areas where we lived, where we had to be concerned about the attitudes that the bishops had. But that situation changed. And we don't have to make believe that the situation didn't change. And especially in America, we don't have to make ourselves slaves. Everybody else is able to scream. What happened? Because Biden was there in Israel one day. So because of that, we forget about what was done, about the babies that were put in ovens, and they claim that we are murderers. And the important thing to remember here, and I think this is very important, they talk about that we're overdoing it. In other words, they killed 1,500. So we have to kill 1,500. That's absurd. It's stupid. We are not going for vengeance. Proportionality has its foundation in vengeance. We are going in because they have proved time and time again that if we don't stop them, they're going to attack us again. We are going in for self-defense. Self-defense means to eliminate their ability to repeat what they have done over and over and over again. They have proved what their intentions are. They have told us, and they keep telling us what they intend to do. And when they say permanent ceasefire means until the next time. They do it in a worse way. It's time that we stop being stupid. It's time that we recognize what is happening. we have to be concerned about the future. And we can be concerned about the future if we understand the present and the past. But if it's Ami Lo Hisbonein, both on a spiritual level and on a military level and on a diplomatic level, we see that Biden comes one day like Paro. So all of a sudden, Paro becomes the hero. We see what he does, how he ignores what happened October 7th. Oh, yeah, it was a terrible thing that happened October 7th, but you have no right to defend yourself. You have no right to prevent it from happening again. Iron Dome would not have stopped what happened October 7th. Giving us Iron Dome, well, it's very important and appreciated that they're financing the research that Israel did that is beneficial for the United States as well as Israel. Well, all that is true, but none of that would have stopped October 7th. So Biden is not helping prevent the atrocity that was done against the Jewish people. We are going in for self-defense, not for vengeance. And self-defense means to prevent October 7th from happening again. And no one can tell me that without going and eliminating the forces of Hamas, we're going to prevent another October 7th. Everybody has the ability to be stupid. But it doesn't mean that you have a right to be stupid if you're going to express an opinion about the Jewish people.
We should hear Besaros Tovos and
Amen.
yeah.